Welcome back, everybody. Very happy to announce that our guest speaker, Ryan Wegner, the Abundance Digital #1 contributor, is offered very generously to speak to the class. So Ryan's a security expert out of, you're in Canada. Where in Canada are you, Ryan?
I'm from Winnipeg.
Winnipeg.
Yes.
So he's going to share with us a Canadian view of the information security. Now, I know you're one of your big strengths is endpoint security, but why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us anything you think would be useful?
Sure thing. So I started my career as an academic. When I did university, I did a master's and a PhD both in artificial intelligence. My whole idea was, this is 10 years ago or more. My idea was I was going to build like these massive intelligence machines and take over the world and all that kind of fun stuff you think about when you're really young and you're just exploring AI. But what I found is the state of AI back then just wasn't at a point where we could do a lot of the things that I would have liked to do, right? We didn't have Alexa back then. We didn't have, like, the natural language processing was nowhere near where it is now. Neural networks at the time were being disparaged as not scalable. People were saying you could never have a neural network that could, do anything meaningful. So everybody was focused on a lot of these mathematical models that I just wasn't into, like support vector machines and that, which actually do produce pretty good results, but wasn't of interest to me at the time. Which is funny because now deep learning is all back into neural networks and that kind of stuff. All the stuff that they told me back 10 years ago would never scale are now certainly scaling. So what happened is I actually got involved in IT security while I was in graduate school. So AI wasn't going anywhere at the time. I was broke. 9/11 happened, and suddenly there was this massive, like, sort of, rah nationalism. Let's go and fix the world. Which, I mean, a lot of friends of mine were in that same sort of group. So you had a lot of people join the military. I was not one who wanted to really join the military. I had no aspirations for being dropped in a desert or anything like that. Lots of respect for all the people who did go that route. The route I went was actually intelligence. So I got hired on with the Canadian Intelligence Agency and basically spent 10 years. So I wasn't always in Winnipeg. I moved out to Ottawa and I've traveled a bit with that job, but doing IT security for government. So I did that for about 10 years. After about 10 years, I decided to take a peek into private sector. So we're talking about 4 or 5 years ago. I mean, IT security is definitely like one of the hottest fields there is right now. So I left government, and the easiest transition for me was to say, well, I do IT security stuff. And so I started working for Darktrace, which was working on combining AI and anomaly detection with sort of like it was a network type sense thing. So they're doing pretty well right now. Then I worked for CrowdStrike for 3 years, and then I've recently gone off my own in doing consulting. So a lot of my work is with a client I work with in the US, running like MSSPs and trying to figure out how do we secure companies. So that's basically the background. And a lot of things I think about right now is working with small companies that have remote workers. So I'm a remote worker. A lot of companies we come across have people, spread out all over the place. And so they don't have those centralized networks anymore. So I used to work almost exclusively with IDSs like Snort. So trying to write network signatures and trying to secure basically the perimeter of the network. And the assumption being that everybody was on desktop computers, everybody was within that perimeter. So you could protect all computers by controlling all the network traffic in and out of that network. More recently, for the past 4 years, actually, well, since leaving Darktrace, I've been much more involved in endpoint security. So the idea that you install an agent onto a machine, and I mean, this concept isn't new, right? I mean, we've had antivirus for ages, but the change in it was you install an agent on the machine that gives you complete visibility and also allows you to interact with that machine to query it and to see what's going on. So whereas traditional antivirus, and that's evolved too, but way back in the day, you used to do things like a lot of hash matching to find viruses. So, you have basically a list of files and their hashes, and you check that hash because if you change anything in the file, that hash is going to change, and that's how you identify that something's malicious on the computer. And it's done a lot through scanning. So you have to we're familiar with when you used to scan a computer, right? Like you hit scan, it sits and scans, and people still do that, right? Scans all your files and lets you know what's malicious. Whereas endpoint security was more from the perspective of let's go kind of active on the machine. Let's see what's going on. Let's explore the processes and start looking for evidence of somebody actually being on the machine running malware. So I'll stop there, Larry, because I could go on. You can sort of help me focus into particular areas that you think would be of
This
interest.
is actually, this is wonderful. It overlaps with so much of what we've already done. So the progression of this class is we go through a development life cycle, and I'll show you how we generally go through this, but we understand what is the basic goals of security, and what is the schedules and budget requirements to get these things done, who's authorized for what. And then we did a risk analysis, and we identified what people need, what they need, and we talked about functional requirements. But in addition to analyzing all of this stuff, we said make sure that you consider not just how it is at any one state, but how it runs across states. So it's actually not in this slide. I close it. But we look at how things change. So the difference between a stateless protocol like UDP versus a stateful protocol, or a static signature of what my fingerprint should look like versus a dynamic signature. How did I sign my name? How long did it take me? Not being a good artist, you could copy it. And a signature-based IDS or a signature-based virus and malware looks at a static signature. But behavior-based engines look at over time. Why was it this way at this time, and then doing this at this time? That just doesn't make sense. And how so much of our malware is encrypted today, we can't do signature detection. Those static looks are rarely useful today. The only thing we really have is what you just said, the behavior on that machine.
Right, and it was to a point where within the industry for a while, signature became sort of a taboo word. So if you were a signature-based detection engine, all of a sudden that wasn't next generation, right? What they wanted was the next gen behavioral. Now, under the hood, I can assure you that most of the things you learn about writing signatures on IDSs apply quite a bit on, endpoint behavior detection. So a lot of the things that you look for when you're running on endpoints are certain processes launching, how they launch, what sort of children they have, what sort of registry keys they invoke, what other processes they inject into. And at the end of the day, you're writing things very similar to a signature, but you're looking at the behavior as opposed to the static characteristics of a file, right? So whereas a traditional antivirus, and when I say traditional, I mean years ago. Like I say, antivirus has come a long way, so it's not fair that I group all antivirus in the same thing. But there was a time when you were looking at just the static characteristics of a file, just like I said, or the static characteristics of a packet, right? What does this packet contain? What does the header look like? Does it have, these particular keywords and that sort of thing?
And what are sometimes, here's what I teach people as far as how IDS evasion often goes. We can't get rid of signature detection. So there are some signatures make sense. I want to look for typically what I can reject something going, I don't even have to look at the behavior. The source IP address is from my network and it came from my outside interface. That's wrong. Go no further. So I can stop those things. And how a lot of IDS processes work, it seems to me, in my experience, is that they do the signature first and then they look at behavior. So a way an attacker could, pretty much put a picture in front of the camera of something else in the room with nobody in the room to, insert misleading information into the sensor, is to not come up clean without a signature, but to come up with a signature for a low risk attack. So the signature-based IDS, if it doesn't know what it is, it goes, I don't know what this is. Let's take a look at the anomalies of behavior. But if the signature-based IDS goes, I know what it is. It's an old low-risk problem. Don't worry about it. The anomaly might not take over. So I just accepted a very useful website that my friends use, and it's good for all kinds of things. It's what's the virus total? Virustotal.com. So you should use this when you're suspicious about a file or URL. But attackers like to do this too, and they'll upload a file that they just built as malware and see if it gets detected. And if it doesn't, they want it to be detected. They'll actually go, no, I want it to be detected. I want them to think it's a low-risk attack. So they'll insert misleading signatures.
Yeah, absolutely. And we see that tactic quite often. So there's a couple of ways you can do when you're attacking a machine, right? Either you can try and not be detected at all, which is more and more difficult depending on how well you know your target. Or like you say, blend in with the noise, right? Look like something that is low priority. There's this term we often use, PUA, potentially unwanted application. if you can get your payload to look like a potentially unwanted application, chances are no one's going to spend the time to clean you up, because depending on the network, if an attacker is going after a network, like I want to think about a massive company. I don't want to use Google because I know their security is quite good, but just imagine a massive Acme corporation with hundreds of thousands of employees. They are going to have so many browser plugins, so many, weird things running their machines. People are going to be installing stuff. And if you can look like Larry just said, if you look like something that no one cares about or has time to worry about, you have a better chance of actually staying there longer, right? Because your SOC analysts are constantly overloaded with false positives. And they're always looking for ways to try and focus in on just the things that are, of high severity, right? So they end up having to prioritize and sometimes dismiss those things, which, it just looks like it's another browser plugin or another browser hijacker. Browser hijackers are one of those things that nowadays, unless you have a very disciplined SOC, those kind of things get ignored because the effort it takes to remove them from all the browsers. When you're in a big company, when you're in a smaller company, it's a different ballgame, right? And we actually work with a lot of companies that are, smaller than 50 endpoints. When you're working with less than 50 endpoints, you can spend more time cleaning the network. But once you get to these massive organizations, especially if you're coming in as an MSSP from the outside into an organization that's been running for 10 or 15 years and have already built up a lot of weird stuff in their network, you're more likely to kind of fly under the radar. Of course, the other option is to not get detected at all. And again, if you know your target, if you know the network you're going after, perhaps you can go without being detected because you can upload a virus total. If you know what virus perk they have deployed, like if you know they're a McAfee shop and you upload a virus total and McAfee doesn't detect it, well, you're a little more confident you can get in that network. Now, the best way around that, of course, or one of the nice ways, is just to have a very layered approach. And this comes back to the idea that, it's taboo to say signatures are the way you detect, but realistically speaking, you want a layered approach. You want to do simple things like have firewalls that are blocking all bad IP addresses, right? Anybody who doesn't do that as a first step, it's just such an easy first step, right? Have a good firewall. You have a blacklist of IPs. Great. That's going to protect you from the low-hanging fruit. Then you move on to having DNS blocking. So I like to be product agnostic, but there's tons of products out there which will just take a list of domain names and block them. You can do it yourself, right? You can write something to sit in your network on your DNS controller and just block a blacklist of domains. And there's so many, domain blacklists out there that it seems like there's no reason not to. And then you move on to, having IDS. Like, you need an IDS, right? Now, one of the reasons why an IDS is so good is that compared to endpoint, I'll get back to endpoint because that's kind of my specialty. But sometimes people will bring devices into the network that you cannot reasonably put endpoint onto, especially phones. People get really cagey when you talk about MDM software and installing anything on their phones because that's they use for personal stuff. And you always have to have this trade-off when you're going into someone's network of privacy versus security. And I find most clients draw the line at the phone. They will
that's a great point. Let me pause you there because my wife works for a big farm and they supply her phone. And I'm assuming that's the major reason is so they can put the MDM in there. But what are you seeing on average with people in maybe I imagine in smaller organizations, it's more likely you keep your phone and you bring that in there. So that becomes a major hole.
So that's one of the things we try and convince clients when we walk in is we tell them you should provide a work phone for every employee because that phone is going to contain, like most people are going to log into their corporate email using that phone, which means when they leave the company, if that's on their personal phone, they're leaving with a bunch of IP on their phone unless you have MDM or something on there to wipe the phone afterwards, right? It's better from a security posture, from our opinion, is just to buy the phone, buy the plan, put the MDM on there and tell them, please don't use this for personal use. It's a pain to carry around two phones. I do it for my work, but from a security perspective, it's much better because then, especially if that phone gets lost, it's immediately wipe the phone, right? So MDM will allow you to, from remotely, if someone reports, Apple does this too, but you can do it through like Cisco Meraki or Jamf or something. So if an employee reports that they lost their phone, you wipe it. if it's an employee's personal phone, there's hesitation, right? Because when's the last time they backed up their pictures? When's the last time they backed up this or that? Like they may be uncomfortable wiping that phone as a first step, and they might be quite upset if you were to do that. But if you control the phone, if you own the phone, you can decide what to do with it. So that's where we're again. The problem with that, is, of course, is price. A lot of the companies we work with, they want to be secure, but there's that third. It's almost like a triangle, right? There's the third bit of price point. So you got security, you got privacy, you got price point. And that's where it's a stumbling block, because it can be quite expensive if you want to procure a phone for every single individual on your team, and then manage the plan and manage the MDM. So that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense, and I want my students need to know about MDM software. And the two major features would be that you mentioned one, remote wipe. You may look for that in your near future. And the other one is data encryption, that they can do local encryption. So there are times when you're going to do remote wipe and read the questions carefully. My students get a test that's it's between 100 and 150 adaptive questions. So and they cover multiple areas, multiple domains of security. So definitely MDMs could show up, and I would look for remote wipe and data encryption. Awesome.
Yeah, and you'd be surprised. You would think it happens more than you expect. Like, so we have a few clients, or I have a few clients that I work with, and I'm surprised how often laptops get lost, stolen, or misplaced. It happens quite often, and it's critical within that first few hours. And I'm sure there's like some specifics from the CISSP course, so I'm going off of experience. I'm sorry if I conflict anything that says in there. But within that first few hours, you have to make a decision quick on what you're going to do. Like, how long do you give that employee to find that phone before you say, hey, it's time to wipe, because all that IP is on there, and we just don't want that out there. If every device is encrypted to begin with, so I mean, your Apple laptops, you turn encryption on every way. All your Windows laptops you can come and encrypt the hard drives. That helps you ensure, or at least it helps ensure that it takes the adversary a little bit longer to get at the information on the machine. Now, arguably, if it's just someone stole your laptop and they have no idea where you work and they're just wanting to resell it, I mean, they can just try and wipe it and put a new hard drive or something like that. If you're talking about a company who has state adversaries, then you have to be concerned about what if they can actually decrypt the information. So I can encrypt my Mac laptop, and basically what I've done is bought myself a little bit of time, but given enough time, a lot of these encryption algorithms can be broken. I won't give you specific numbers.
No, but that's a very, hopefully I stress that when we talk about security controls, prevention, detection, response, no preventive control really prevents forever. So what he just said, it adds time, it adds a delay. In fact, in one of the CISSP books from the ISC Square, I think it was the 2007 official guide, they didn't use the term preventive, they used delay. So a safe, we said, is rated, 60 minutes with the best tools in a torch. An encryption algorithm based on entropy and processing speed, we guess a work factor, but we didn't say we totally prevented it. We delayed it. That's a very good point.
Yeah, and this actually leads nicely into a little bit about endpoint and the whole idea of delaying. So when you're talking about when you're deploying a security stack in a company, one of the things you have to consider is a sophisticated adversary is going to find, or likely going to find, a way in somewhere. You can't really prevent someone from getting in eventually, basically because there's so many different ways. And one of the ways that often an adversary gets in is through social engineering, and I can talk about that separately. But the idea being, if they circumvent your IDS, if they circumvent your antivirus, then they still have to do something on the machine, and they have to continue to keep a presence, right? Depending on what their goal is. If their goal is to collect intelligence, or if their goal is to try and you can put e-crime in that same thing. It's not like an intelligence organization, but the idea that you're trying to collect credit card numbers or enough information to run a scam. So what Endpoint allows you to do, or what it helps do, is it helps you to proactively hunt for existing adversaries that have somehow gotten onto your network or gotten onto your host and are still there. And you're drawing down the amount of time it takes you to find them. So on the one hand, you're making it more difficult for them to get into the network. So you're delaying, they have to expend effort to get a presence on the network. And then when they're there, if you have endpoint software and you're doing regular hunts, then you're shortening the time that they can be there without being detected. So I know that that's kind of a, I mean, on the one hand, it keeps us in business. On the other hand, it's kind of, discouraging to think that almost all networks at some point can potentially be compromised. It's just a matter of how quickly you can react and how quickly you can get the adversary.
And something we talked about earlier was the time delay it actually, on average, took. So according to the Office of Management and Budget, it up to like 2015, it was 18 months. And then they bragged, we made significant progress. It's now as little as 9 months. So that means that from the time an attacker breaks in to the time some federal agency in the United States discovers it, it's on average 9 months of damage they've done.
Yes.
And what do we call those things, guys? It's a very testable term. These things that went on for a long time, especially if they had like admin privileges. That would be an advanced persistent threat, or an APT, and they don't do acronyms on this test anymore. So yeah. And look, CrowdStrike, look at that. They help. So just to your point, and you said you were with CrowdStrike for 3 years?
Yes, I was with CrowdStrike for 3 years.
Well, my big question is, where in the Ukraine did you hide that server?
Oh my goodness. You said you're recording.
I'm blaming you guys. Yes, I am. This is my company. I can talk political if I want to, even though
you So I worked for CrowdStrike for 3 years. I was in their Overwatch team. So the one thing about CrowdStrike that I adored is they really brought to the forefront this idea of hunting. Not that other companies weren't doing it. There were other companies doing it. Government agencies have been doing it for a while. And it's probably worth talking a little bit about what hunting is compared to like a regular SOC. So like your standard SOC operating procedure, and this varies from company to company, is you have your IDS, you have your AV. They're going to generate alerts. You triage those alerts, and you make sure that you basically resolve all those alerts by the end of the day. So depending on the level of your SOC analysts, some of them, their job description is basically make sure things are resolved. Right? That's what you do. And if there was no alert for it, that's not your responsibility, right? Whereas hunting brought to the forefront this idea that assume there is not going to be an alert. Now go into the data and sort through it and find that adversary, that advanced persistent threat who has just gotten past all your alerts, right? Look for weird things in your network that shouldn't be, because as the person sitting in the company, you should know your company better than the adversary. The biggest challenge for an adversary when they get into a network is trying to figure out the right way to blend in that won't seem strange. So a lot of adversaries get caught from making silly mistakes, like logging in the middle of the night. Like that's the most obvious example that comes.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Just so that would be picked up in like I'm thinking of my students' test objectives with an identity and access management tool could help identify that, right? An IAM tool, I would think.
Oh, exactly. Yes. And just making sure that, and following that is making sure somebody's looking at those logs, right? So the tool is going to pick up, it's going to write a log somewhere, and just making sure that someone actually reads that log at some point and recognizes that happened, and then can correlate it properly with, what is that person? Because sometimes, often if you get a big enough company, again, you get weird things. It turns out HR guy, logged in at 2:00 in the morning because the CEO needed some paperwork and he needed it now. So
you know how often we would think we could take down a server. It's 2 a.m. Right? Okay, now we can reboot it. Get a call. It's a salesman. He's in Japan. He's trying to get his mail. Tell him it'll be up in 5 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. So there's all these weird things. So it's building up an understanding of the company and the behaviors so that you can recognize what's weird, and it makes the adversary, it makes it more difficult for them because they have to do some guesswork. And some of them just aren't great at that, right? A lot of the adversaries are assuming that no one's looking.
Right.
So I mean, I've seen cases where adversaries have actually triggered antivirus alarms. They know they've triggered the alarms, and they keep going because they just try another method. Like no one's kicked them out yet. So from the SOC point of view, they see an alarm for a particular thing flash. Maybe they, remediate by deleting the file. So if a malware, if a file triggers a malware signature, they delete the file, job done, they move on to the next alert. The adversary, well, they've lost that file, but they still have a presence, so they just continue doing their thing. So from that
I can give you guys an example. They've been hearing my IDS go off with false positives. I have a Ring doorbell in the back of my office here. Well, I also have another building back there that a contractor keeps setting it off, keep getting motion detected. I also have some stray cats that I put out food for, and they set it off. And a burglar could walk past, set it off, and go, "Yeah, I don't care." Larry's ignoring that anyway.
Yes, exactly. They're assuming that the SOC is overwhelmed and probably, and that comes back to the looking like a potentially unwanted application, right? They're assuming that the SOC is overwhelmed if the company is large enough, right? Now, I mean, also the advantage the adversary has is, honestly, if they do get caught, they move on to the next victim. If you're talking about an e-criminal actor. Now, if you're a state actor and you have a particular objective, particular goal, like you have a certain target that you have to get information out of, I mean, that's a different ballgame. If you're an e-crime actor, I mean, you're always going to just move on to the next target, which is an advantage to us as security professionals, right? We just have to make it hard enough on the e-crime actor that they don't get any value out of continuing with their attack. I mean, that's not the only thing, but that's one of the strategies we do, right?
Well, one of the things they need to know, and I'm curious on what you're experiencing right now, they need to know that perhaps the most prevalent cyber attack today is the ransomware attacks. But now I'm seeing a lot of cryptojacking, and there's debates as to which is more prevalent. What do you think? What are you experiencing?
So I did, there was a time when I was seeing a lot of the people installing crypto miners in browsers. And I will be honest, when I first saw that, my knee-jerk reaction was, why do we care about this? And I mean, I took a lot of abuse from that, saying, like they're mining.
Well, they're stealing CPU. It's like they're stealing the water out of my hose, from outside drinking my water.
Exactly. So from the individual's perspective, if it's not interrupting my workday, if my company's still making money, it's not
slowing me down.
Yeah. So that's what I had to come to realize. So from the security perspective, as far as the severity of the threat, it's more likely to get ignored, but the adversary is still making a lot of money. So he's less at risk. The adversary is less at risk of any sort of prosecution or anything happening to them, but they're still generating funds. And if they can generate enough money, then they don't have to do the riskier attacks. So you follow my reasoning there?
Yeah, sure. Well, we break all our threats for information against information confidentiality, information integrity, and information availability. This is most people think of confidentiality as security. So as long as they're not stealing my secrets, I must be secure. But if you're reducing my availability, that's not as secure either. But I agree with you. Most people don't prosecute that as much as loss of confidentiality. You stole PII, we're going to go after you.
Yeah. If I find you installed a crypto miner in my browser, I will delete it.
Right.
But odds are I'm not going to go after you. Right. Like the adversary feels less risk. Now, in general, I think e-crime actors. Even aside from that, so and to finish that thought there before, I actually do worry more about it now. That was my initial reaction. Knee-jerk reaction was, why do I care about this? Then I came around to of course that makes sense. You're right. You're taking CPU. You're limiting someone's availability. There's all kinds of reasons why we have to clean those up. So that was my knee-jerk reaction, just because I spent a lot of time working on e-crime and APT, and so I was kind of. Anyways, well, we'll move on. I'll stop making excuses. We'll move on to that.
No, that's fine. Your thought process. I love hearing it because they're going to go through it too. You have to weigh these things out. So very much.
Yeah, well, because anytime you go to do and this was one of the most shocking things working in the private sector that was different from government. Anytime you go to remediate something, there's a cost associated with that, and that cost can be substantial for the company. So if you are working as an MSSP and you find a browser hijacker and you tell them, okay, this is going to cost you X amount of dollars and X amount of hours for me to clean this out of your network, they have to then think, well, how much is this costing us to leave it in? How much damage is it doing? Which one, should I spend
accepted risk
$10,000 to clean up something that is not really doing much damage at this time, right? So that comes in a lot. So you'll come across customers who are quite happy leaving some things that you really don't want in their network because it costs too much to clean up. and they
Oh,
don't
dude.
as a major
Here's I'm a packet analyst. I solve everything with Wireshark. Okay,
right.
with a sniffer. I've when I'm not teaching, I do mostly application performance analysis. So the thing is, it's slow. Okay,
Mhm.
I sniff it, and I see a bunch of reasons why it could be slow. There's a bunch of protocols that you probably don't need there. But let's
Right.
take let's top the first. Maybe I find 20 potential reasons. Does the first one make it fast enough for you? Wow, that's a lot faster. Let me try it. Hey, can you get a little faster? Second, third? Yeah, dude, that's perfect for us. I'm done. I am not going to try to solve the other 17 problems.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. So, and I'll bring that back to ransomware, because this is a strange one. And if you guys haven't dealt with it, you're going to come across this decision that has to be made. And even the FBI has flip-flopped on this before. I think I know their current stance, but I won't quote it because I'm not sure. You can look it up. When ransomware hits the network, do you pay the ransom or not?
Oh,
Because paying for remediation is
sure.
expensive.
Yeah,
And one of the major things the e-crime actors are doing is they're trying to find the price point. It's a business, right? They are in business, and they're trying to find the price point that is going to encourage people to pay it because it's too expensive to remediate.
sure.
And it's a very, very gray and hard decision to make. And if you're the CISO in a company and someone tells you, we could pay $2,000 and make this actor go away, or we could bring someone in
We
for,
don't bow to terrorism. I won't give in to the kidnapper's demand, but they have your child. Never mind. Yeah,
exactly. It is a very uncomfortable situation. As security professionals, we have to make sure that we give the right, if not the right advice, we have to give advice that the company can accept and helps them, right? So sometimes you put aside that whole thing that we won't negotiate with terrorists, and I know companies sometimes just pay it, right, just to get it done. I don't advocate that as a security professional. I
oh,
would
there was a whole
rather
bunch of them in the state of Texas a month or two ago where they had to pay in. That's what they did the cost benefit analysis in Texas. What's it called again? Ransomware attack. It happened. It was a big thing, and they had to. 22
right.
towns hit in August, and they had to.
Yeah, and of course, I mean the one of the best solutions, and you look at it and you think, oh my goodness, why didn't they just have backups? Why didn't they just do that?
Isn't
And it
that the
turns out
secret to everything? Yeah.
it always it's like it helps a lot, and it looks like that should make things simple. But actually, it turns out restoring all those backups still takes time and money. It's not as straightforward as I press a button, or I mean, ideally it'd be straightforward. I press a button, all my backups are restoring. But sometimes you'll go and look to the backups and find out that they're not actually where you thought they were. The backup wasn't right, or the backup was from 3 months ago, and you're going to lose.
You want to hear a backup story, or just in a nutshell?
Oh, I love that.
This was in the mid '90s. Scott Paper was my customer. I was at IBM. They get acquired by Kimberly Clark. Rumors of insider trading. They are required to maintain backups of all email for the last 3 years. Some brilliant manager says, we do it for 7. And they were subpoenaed for 7 years of email. I was the guy that had to build an MS Mail Server 3.0 that could read quarter-inch cartridge tapes. Then I had to build a 3.1 that could read quarter-inch cartridge and 8mm DAT. Then a 4.0, then an Exchange server that could read DLT drives. This was not fun. And
Right.
most of the backups over 3 years didn't work anyway.
Right. Yeah. Oh my goodness. I've heard many. That is one of the better stories I've heard, because I could just imagine how much work that would be. Especially.
Oh, do you know how hard it was just to find a clean copy of MS Mail 3.0? Because this was in '97 when Exchange 4.0 was already out. I got to find media that allows me to build an MS Mail server.
Right. Oh my. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot to unpack there about sort of the ransomware and the tough decisions you have to make when you're in the situation. I mean, all I can say is there are the steps you can take, of course, to try and ensure that you don't become that victim, right? So having that layered security approach, that's going to help with ransomware. Of course, the ransomware actors are constantly trying to find ways around it. But I mean, most of the situations I see, or many of the situations I see, when you really dig into it, you realize that the network wasn't properly secured in the first place. No, people don't generally want to admit that.
No.
But when you go and you say, oh, they didn't have their antivirus updated, oh, they didn't have any IDS deployed, you start to uncover all these things that people didn't do, because security for a lot of companies is an afterthought, right? They're trying to build a business, and then they add on security afterwards when they realize they need to. And working with a lot of smaller companies, you see that often, right? They don't even really consider security, especially when all their services are being relegated to cloud services. So,
I'll tell you what, I find that people now know not to make it an afterthought, but they think about it ahead of time once, and they research, yep, you're supposed to do backups. Did you know that? Yep, okay, you're supposed to encrypt data. But then they don't actually do it. So they might have done their due diligence, but they're not taking continuous due care. That's an ongoing process. Yeah.
Right, right. And I think one of the worries, I think we talked about this last time, so I'll touch about it again today, is as more and more services are moving to the cloud, sometimes people assume that security is being handled for them. Like AWS, they specify it outright. Like, we are not responsible for the security of your applications. We will host your applications. You have to secure your servers. You have to make sure the permissions are set up right. Now, it turns out they give you a lot of good advice. If you read through their tutorials, they'll tell you, like, hey, make sure you lock this down. But they give you enough rope to hang yourself, right? You can set up a very insecure production environment that an adversary can get into. And if you go to AWS and say, what the heck, why is this pwned? They're going to tell you, well, that was your responsibility. You have to have a network engineer or security engineer reviewing this stuff to ensure you do it securely. And same with O365 and email. Now, O365 I actually like, because they do have quite a bit of built-in security. So I just finished saying that cloud
Well, you were basically identifying platform and infrastructure as a service where that's
right
on you, and that's true. But Office 365, since that's software as a service, they're going to take on more of that responsibility. So I understand where you were going.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of, and depending on what tier you buy, right? You can buy higher tiers to get more security. One of the awkward things is, if you want to get logs out of some of these cloud services, I mean, in some cases you have to pay for the bandwidth to get those logs out. In other cases, you have to buy much higher levels of service to actually get access to the logs, which seems insane when we used to host things locally, right? You used to own your mail server. It would sit in your data center and you would have access to all those logs. So when a breach happens, potentially you have all those logs to go through and you can review that and do an investigation. When a breach happens now and it involves O365, if you don't have the correct tier, you don't necessarily have access to those logs. Now, that can make investigation very difficult, or it can make it very costly if you have to try and retroactively, get stuff or pay Microsoft to upgrade you to a different level of service. So it's things to keep in mind. They do, like for O365, they do some level of security, but it's something that you still have to keep an eye on and secure. And it really moves this idea of what it used to be is, perimeter, everybody's inside your perimeter, you just protect your perimeter. Now it is so diverse, these networks, that, you have to make sure that you understand, where's your data going? Where is it sitting? How am I securing it? And is it all compliant? And compliance, I'm sure you guys talk about this a lot. I can tell you, when you get out there and you're working with the companies, I mean, people will talk about HIPAA and GDPR and all that kind of stuff, but you've really got to make sure that when your data goes out into the cloud, your provider is really providing that certification on where the data is sitting, and also how you use the data. So you can talk about HIPAA and GDPR, but if you copy, an Excel spreadsheet with a bunch of passwords on your desktop and a bunch of personal information, it doesn't matter if it came from a HIPAA compliant database. Now it's on your desktop. So you are now responsible.
I have this graphic up here that actually you guys may get tested something on. I don't actually have it in our slides, but since Ryan brought it up, depending on whether, so he was saying with O365, which is SaaS, they're going to do a lot of the security for you, but still you're responsible somewhat for identity and access management. You're still responsible for some client protection, and you're totally responsible for your data yourself, that you classify and account for that, right? And then they get less and less responsibility as we move on. So when you get some Amazon Web Services, depending on whether they're doing PaaS or infrastructure or Microsoft Azure, the only thing they're really responsible for at that point, if that's a GDPR violation, well, unless it was a physical exploit, you're very likely still responsible for some of that, all or some of that. Yeah, very good point.
Yeah, thank you. Is there anything else? So help guide me into things. I mean, you know me, Larry. I could talk for hours and hours about.
Well, we still got like 20 minutes is what I was expecting, up to an hour. But you guys are being very quiet in the background. Does anybody have questions for Ryan?
Oh yeah, I'd happily take questions.
I'm kind of curious. So while we're waiting for people to put in the AI stuff, surely it's mixing. So since I do get political in my own class, one of the things I'd like to pick on that I actually agreed with Trump. It was just the way he said it. He was going to fix healthcare and get rid of that stupid Obamacare. But then after a few months being president, he realized that that wasn't as easy to do. And he said in a funny speech, it turns out healthcare is a lot more complex than anybody would have known. Actually, I think a few people knew that, but it is complex. And it's getting more and more complex, and managing my networks are complex, and managing security. And a lot of malware is AI driven. And I think the only way to do this is with AIs. And we may not have artificial general intelligence for another decade, but specialized, when you build it to do one thing, play chess or whatever, it could be many times better than a human. I would expect that I should be able to create endpoint security using AIs that is many times better than a human would be at it. So I'm sure you have those thoughts. What are your current
So actually,
stats there?
I do have a lot of thoughts on that. So it's interesting because there are some problems that AI is very good at solving and can solve because, I mean, one of the reasons it can solve it is not much of an adversary. So let's take driving, for instance. You can teach a car to drive really well using AI as long as someone is not purposely trying to derail you. So if everybody is roughly obeying traffic laws, there's kind of a set way that you can teach it. Okay, you know, you stop at a red light, you make sure there's no one going through, you can turn. You know, there's sort of rules that we all kind of learn about driving. And when anybody goes off the rails, like does something completely ridiculous, like, you know, drives 150 down a residential street, I mean, bad things are going to happen. But that's rare, right? Most people obey laws, which means AI is in somewhat of a controlled environment. It can learn the rules. The problem I find with AI and security is your adversaries are constantly trying to evade. So AI requires lots of data. It has to kind of learn patterns. And as it's learning those patterns, if the patterns themselves are shifting because your adversary is trying to evade them, it becomes more difficult. So I've seen a lot of algorithms applied in IT security, not saying they become irrelevant, but they don't work as well once they get into the real world because the data is constantly changing. So you have to like constantly be retraining these things, right?
Let me pause you there and see if this helps with you. So there's Bruce Schneier. You familiar with Bruce?
Doesn't
Bruce
ring a
Schneier?
bell, unfortunately, at the moment, but it might.
Bruce Schneier is a cryptographer. He wrote Blowfish and Two Fish, but he wrote some great books on security, Secrets and Lies. It's a great blog to check out. And he said that you know, safety engineering deals with Murphy's law. If something could go wrong, eventually it will. But security engineering deals with Satan's law. If something could go wrong, there's a malicious SOB is going to make it go wrong. So you're saying. So yeah, so when you were saying that, I was like, yeah, AI can drive as long as it's only dealing with Murphy's law, and that reminded me how CMMI deals with Murphy's. You know, it's like a process. Either something could go wrong, they can't even do the process. Oh, they got it done. They're able to repeat it. They've documented it. They can measure it. They got it optimized. But a critic said this is dealing with when people are just trying. When everyone's trying to drive, they're not trying to mess anybody up. They might not be a great driver, but AI can handle this stuff. Where it becomes tricky is when, and there's an American Air Force guy, he said, that assumed people were trying. People are not always trying. People are sometimes claiming they're trying and not doing it, or they obstructively adhere to the old way, or worse, they lie and they sabotage their competitors. And this is the stuff I've seen, all types of sabotage attempts on AI drivers, and we have to solve that issue. Sure.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. So one of the things I've noticed with AI algorithms, especially in a static analysis, so you can have an AI algorithm do static analysis on a file and look for unusual characteristics. AI is great at clutching those unusual characteristics to say that this file is weird. It's weirder than anything I've seen. but
Right.
that doesn't mean it's malicious,
Right.
right? So there are certain packers that adversaries use, but regular people use them too. So you can get an AI who says every time a file is packed using this packer, it's probably malicious. And it might be that, 80% of the time is right, but then you still got 20% of the time where it isn't. And when you're dealing with lots of files and lots of networks, that 20% comes up a lot, right? So you get
Sure.
a lot of false positives. So if you're looking at thousands of files, 20% is hundreds of
There could be a
files.
lot of lost work. And it reminds me of like spam filters. You can get 90% of it turned out to actually be spam. But if you put 10% of valid traffic, valid emails went in my spam folder, people usually get really upset about that.
Yes, that's an excellent point too. And we run into that quite often where people want no spam in their inbox, but of course, the second something that isn't spam gets in their spam folder, they react. They notice it, right? They notice it's
Yeah.
gone.
Yeah. Or they look stupid later. No, I never got your email. What?
Yeah. So we deal a lot with the low-hanging fruit, not the low-hanging fruit, sorry, the less sophisticated attacks that come through, but they're social engineered, so they're really hard for an algorithm to pick up. So I mean, the example I'm trying to think of is the gift card example, and we talked about this last time, where if you want to send an email to someone and all it says is, "Hey, have you got a second? I really need your help." Period. If that's your entire email, a spam filter has trouble distinguishing that from an actual email, right? So at that point, if your adversary is willing to do that sort of social engineering, like something that looks plausible, now, to be fair, it won't come from your boss's account. So you can imagine you get an email that says it's from your CEO. It's not from your CEO because the email address is different at the top. But all it says is, "Hey, I need help." I mean, how are you going to filter that out? How is the AI going to distinguish that from your friend who actually needs help? Because it seems like reasonable. Like it catches a lot of people off guard. I've seen a lot of people fall victim to that, at least to the point where they engage with the adversary and then they realize there's something funny when they're asking them to buy, $300 in Amazon gift cards, and it just doesn't fit with the CEO's personality.
I guess what I tend to think of is kind of, and I'm sure you're well plugged into this as you're on abundance more than I am. But AI for the students is not going to be, the war isn't AI versus human. It's AI assisted versus non-AI assisted. So AI can help me with, like you use the term, low hanging fruit. My AI, my smart vacuum cleaner can vacuum most of my house. It's not going to. So far, it has not done a perfect job. But it alleviates 80% of the work for me.
Yeah, and that's exactly where I see things. So right now, and one of the things we're seeing a lot of is because of the technology, because of the artificial intelligence, because of the way the tools are advanced, you see more and more situations where smaller SOCs can manage more endpoints. So you can imagine situations where, 10 years ago or 20 years ago, you couldn't have a SOC with 3 people covering more than 100 machines because there was a lot of work to do. Nowadays, I see SOCs of 4 or 5 people handling thousands of endpoints.
Yeah.
Because most of the low-hanging fruit's gone, right? The AI is taking care of it. It's so ubiquitous, we don't even realize just how much is already being handled for us. So the spam is a perfect example. I'll run into MSPs who, will see a spam email and they're like, "Oh, there's spam here." And then I have to remind them, "You know what? There's thousands of spam that you never see because it gets handled. It gets filtered out. Like all this work is already done for us." And you start to forget just how much a network is constantly under attack because all these things are being taken care of. Same with scanning. Sometimes I see people get excited about either their network is being scanned or there's a bunch of failed logins to an account. And then I have to remind them, these are always happening. This is such an easy thing to automate that you're always going to see failed logins and you're always going to see scans. The fact that you stumble upon this particular one does not mean your network is any more or less under attack than everybody else, because these things are just prevalent. They're just ubiquitous.
Yeah, starting at as much as a dozen years ago, remote desktop, the RDP, I think it was 3389 or something. There were so many exploits, so many vulnerabilities that my understanding from people working this field, everybody, home users, every home system, every IP address is being scanned for RDP vulnerabilities every day.
Yeah, and it's a matter of, and then you have to get back to that. How much time do I spend investigating this particular thing if it's happening everywhere to everyone.
And as long as
There's
I
not a lot
prevented it, it's not like it was a successful exploit.
Exactly. And that's when I'm working with, because I work a lot mentoring new SOC analysts. And one of the things I have to remind them is if it's blocked, check if there's anything around it. For the most part, you move on because you're looking for the things that got through, right? You're looking for what actually penetrated the network. Now, lots of blocks from a particular, a particular flavor to it might indicate a particular adversary is after you. But if it's blocked, if it didn't get through, move on to trying to find the things that got through, because that's the important bit.
That's
right?
the important stuff. Whatever, because students, remember, the important thing is not catching bad guys. It's business continuity.
Yes.
The most important thing is that we keep the business running. So while I have you here, I think it's pretty funny. My wife is the director of incident management at a large farm, and she said they're CrowdStrike users. So when I saw that you were CrowdStrike, it struck a bell for a couple of reasons. And so they had an incident, and this could be a couple of testable objectives, guys, about think before you act and doing an impact analysis. Don't just start taking containment measures. So we remember how stateful firewalls work, right? Nobody's allowed in unless somebody on the inside requested it. So if somebody has malware on a server and they want to get it in your machine, your server's not going to let that in. Your firewall's not going to let that in because they can't just come in. So generally, it's a two-phase approach. So somebody gets hit with a spam, a phishing attack. They click on it, the link goes out to the malware site, and then it can download the malware. And now the firewall says, oh, well, you were requested that on the inside. So the stateful firewall says you're allowed back in. So it comes in two stages. So there was a big vulnerability over the summer. I believe it was an RDP vulnerability, a big Microsoft vulnerability. It was related to WannaCry, but it wasn't WannaCry. My wife got so mad when I kept saying WannaCry. But it was a two-phase thing that this phishing attack would come out, and then this malware would, people were getting the phishing, and their incident management team freaked out. Oh my gosh, everyone, emergency meeting. We saw that phishing attack come in. A whole bunch of our users got that email scam that we were warned about. My wife's like, why are you panicking? Look at CrowdStrike. It's blocking it. It's not letting it in. Actually, I don't think that particular thing was CrowdStrike at the firewall. It would have been here at the endpoint, or maybe it was, it might have been FireEye, I forget. But whatever the case is, it wasn't coming in. So to Ryan's point, just because you detected a problem doesn't mean it actually exploited anything. And you might not want to spend any time and money investigating that.
Yeah, that sums up perfectly. So if there aren't any questions, Larry, I probably should. I got a hard stop in a few minutes, but I'll open up for any last comments, anything you want me to talk about before I head out?
There was, and I got caught up in my little story there. Oh no, yeah, it was the endpoint. Oh, the cloud stuff, because they get a lot of cloud stuff, and I know that you were looking at doing a security as a service. So, tell us quickly about that. What are you offering?
Oh, thanks, Larry. So I do think a lot about, how do you secure things as they're moving out to the cloud. So, yeah, so I hadn't really prepared anything. I do a lot of consulting for people about trying to secure networks. A lot of what I worry about is health networks. That's where my passion is making sure that, because you got all this health data and it's moving everywhere. And I want to make sure that people are actually paying attention to security. And I've had situations where I've dealt with healthcare providers and realized that, they're kind of checking all the boxes for HIPAA, but they're not really looking at the spirit of it, like what they're supposed to be doing. So there's kind of this idea that you can meet the requirements, but not the spirit of what you're trying to do, right? So that got me thinking about trying to just ensure that when I come across, companies who are working with health data, that I try and open up the conversation to talk to them and say, okay, well, do you understand where your data is going? Do you understand how it's being secured? Do you even have a SOC? Are you outsourcing your SOC? All that kind of stuff. So I'm doing a lot of exploring that space now that I'm kind of on my own as a consultant, and making sure that, I'm having conversations with people about it. I'm sorry, that wasn't really well prepared, Larry. That's
That's fine. I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but as people saw that I'm a member, I've been talking about Peter's stuff since the beginning here, and Ryan is the most active person, and you have some really great posts. I love your. I don't always have time to comment. I do try to read his stuff, and by far, I absolutely love your posts. And the fact that you're into the similar field, I just found a lot of synergy there. So as we're summing up, I mentioned Murphy's Law. Something could go wrong. Eventually, it would. And then the security professional has to be aware of Satan's Law. There's a malicious SOB. But overall, I think our goal as Jedi Knights in this class is Peter's Law. And Peter Diamandis is how I know Ryan through his Abundance Digital Group. His number one principle: if something can go wrong, then fix it. Let's not sit here and complain and point fingers. Let's just fix the problem. And I love that approach. As someone once said, there's two approaches to a problem. When you discover it, do you, one, find the no good SOB who we can blame for it, or two, fix it? Right? That's way more important. So thank you very, very much, Ryan, for making the time. Sherry says, other than user population, supply chain concerns me most. Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's like the most overlooked thing in IT to many of my people. IT security is not the confidentiality issues. It's the availability issues. It's all the risks that we couldn't prevent. We had to quickly detect and then respond in such a way. And we do business continuity. And it's one thing to get the printers up. But if you don't have paper, if you don't have toner, right, if you don't have power, and so much of our supplies are cloud providers now. They provide us with so much service. So thank you again, Ryan. I hope we could do it again.
Yep. Anytime. Always available. Thanks, Larry. Have a good day.
Awesome. You too. Bye-bye.